Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm super happy to have the chance to talk to Dan and you about enterprise SEO, because that's something I'm dealing with since, I don't know, 16, 17 years now. Um, and there's so many things that are actually still unsolved. And the reason I've joined SEMrush in January is like being able to like work with the awesome foundation they've already built, like not just their platform and the tools, but the data and the people. And I'm using this foundation to build now specifically solutions for large enterprise companies. And I'm super happy to get like ideas and from the typical challenges you have, because my main goal is to like make workflows, especially repetitive workflows, time-consuming workflows, or workflows that occur like at specific events, like with like Google updates coming, or like there's a deployment that was broken and something went wrong. And I want to build solutions that specifically aim for these repetitive workflows that cost you a lot of time, that sometimes only happen afterwards, that something happened and you had a drop in traffic and a drop in revenue, and then you start trying to fix it. And my goal really is to build like solutions that can cover things like very early on, maybe even proactively before things go south, and stuff like this. And I don't have like a final product yet, so I'm not able to tell you like, hey, I'm going to have these features and this and that, because I'm still in this investigation phase where I'm doing lots of interviews with large companies and people who work with large companies. And it's super exciting to see lots of patterns that people deal with the same problems over and over again. And yeah, I'm happy to share a couple ideas, but I'm super happy to get many of the ideas from you as well.
I'm one of your biggest fans in this aspect that I've, like I mentioned in our private chat earlier, I've been quite bored with SEO, in a sense that there's nothing really that exciting happening, and a lot of same things seem to regurgitate. But 20 years in SEO, I've done all sorts of things. I've done very small projects and I've done very large projects, and I would say some enormous projects that were simply really difficult to wrangle. So I really do appreciate the challenges that come with the complexity of very large SEO projects, whether they be big brands or just enormous e-commerce websites or big content websites. It tends to get really complex very quickly. Now, to kickstart a couple of things, and I do want your comments, Marcus, about couple of ideas you've had. I'm dying to hear what they are. But I just wanted to kickstart some things that I have a bullet point list of things that come to mind when I think of pain points and process regarding big projects, and a lot of it overlaps with small projects. So I'll just go in no particular order. So we've got in the SEO process, we've got the auditing process, we've got the technical SEO, and then the content, internal, external, automated content. I think as far as automated content goes, I think natural language generation and semantic analysis, this is all very interesting. There's outreach and PR. We've got the company silos and teams. I've worked with enterprise clients, and we discuss with them. We discuss an SEO topic, and they say, "Oh no, that's not us. That's them. That's the other company." To us, the customers and providers, they're the same company, but for them, there's such strong division within the teams that they completely act like two different companies. Even to the point where people that are in charge of blog and products and support, they are seen as different companies entirely. And there's the matter of reporting, there's the matter of compliance, and events. So events, I see many different classes of events. Tiny little internal events, manually executed things and activities. And there are automated events, things that have happened more or less outside of the control of the website, but are towards the website. Like a new link towards a page is an event that took place. Other types of events would be external events to do with competition, and then of course the global events like algorithm updates and global changes, like SERP layout changes and things like that. So the events are interesting because they need to be mapped, monitored, and they later on they help with my next bullet point is correlations. So if something happens, then something else happens. Are they correlated? And what's the confidence level between the two events? Is it something that I've done, or is it something that Google's done, or is it both? And how can we be sure? I know this is one of your topics that you've looked into in the past, and I think you will migrate some of those ideas onward. Tests, SEO tests, content, structure, like even click-through rate optimization, which is one of my favorite things as well. How do we structure those tests? How do we run them? Can we automate them? Competitive intelligence, workflow, project management, metrics, reporting, automated insights. That's one of my favorites. I don't want to be digging up for insights. I want the system to float up an insight and just email me and say, hey, look, we found this interesting little nugget. Take a look at this. Take a look-see. I want the, it's almost like data intelligence. It just shoots through an insight and lets me as a human decide what to do with that information. Then there's strategy and prioritizing, and the matter of access to data, to people, to systems. But ultimately, like when somebody's facing a very large SEO project, of course, you start with building the strategy, and strategy is built with insights that derive from data. So there's a process that goes in a workflow that is followed until you get to the point where you've decided what needs to be done, when, how, and then you organize work, put things in place, prioritize activities, and roll out an implementation schedule where you monitor, report, catch up, do your whips. So it's all very complex. Now, all the things that I've just thrown at you, which one seems like the most alarming, the most important, and most urgent one to wrangle?
I mean, especially the larger and more complex the company gets, the more people have an influence on the website's performance, and sometimes people don't even know or understand that they have a large influence, like a front-end developer that, for example, makes a deployment and changes something on the site that is then just hard to pass for a web function, has a high influence, but maybe without knowing. I do believe the biggest thing, especially for large companies, is the human factor. And we should not just talk about people and why people are making mistakes and how they have a ripple effect on many other things. But I do believe in large enterprise companies where there can't be one generalist in SEO that kind of tries to manage lots of different things. I do believe the thing we should talk about is like, especially in enterprise, it's about process and people. And a lot of things you've said then is really about process and people, because like what happens when there was like an event, and how should the reporting look like to different stakeholders, to management? It should be different than to product and engineering and stuff like this. And I think process and people is something we should cover. And I think this is where the community have like lots of like feedback, because every company has different processes and different reportings, and this is where I think we can learn the most. Because, and you also said like with like correlation, and I wouldn't, for me, it's not about like just finding more correlations and building or putting this into the product. For me, it's more about cause and effect. What are people doing that has a certain effect, and can we measure it? Like you've mentioned, like, oh, there was a link pointing to a website. Does it have an effect? It's unlikely that the effect will be immediate. There is a delay always, and there are different delays. But what is the effect, and what does it mean? And this is something I would like to talk to, and we can be more specific. For example, there's one thing I definitely want to talk about is one of the most underestimated disciplines in SEO, especially for large companies, is internal linking. People totally underestimate how much power you have in like organizing and structuring your page in terms of information architecture and how like links are distributed. And that's where SEOs often just are not able to influence anything, because they say, oh, this is owned by this business unit and this is owned by this business unit, and I'm not able to do anything. But this is where it starts, right? You start to give up on, like, oh, I'm not able to influence this, so I don't care about maybe internal linking because I'm not able to influence. But you often are when you have like proof or good ideas. That's also my learning. I've worked with many large companies in the past, worked with like companies that own these large companies, like with lots of private equity companies, and they start listening if you have like very good arguments, data, and if you come with like, hey, this is how others are doing it, like using best practices, and if you use a well-known brand, people start to pay attention, like, oh, if they're doing it, we might listen because that might be something for us. And I think this is also part of enterprise SEO, using best practices and like good success stories from others to get more attention internally, right? Because that's maybe the last thing I want to wrap up here in my little monologue is, the larger the company gets, the less time actually you have to do something. Because in large companies, you have always these prioritization issues. Oh, is it more important to now include Apple Pay on our website? Because if we include Apple Pay, we can increase conversion by X%. Or should we do this very large SEO story? Maybe has an impact, but we don't know yet because it's hard to measure. So it's always like this like balancing of having all these priorities at the same time. And I've seen this, that the larger a company gets, the less likely it is that you can like really push through SEO stories, because you always need to have arguments. Like, if I invest X story points in my sprint, what is the result Y? And it's, as you know from SEO, it's often hard because it's always like, it depends. We don't know exactly if we change internal links what the effect will be. And that's another thing I believe, when you have like good data, good stories, good arguments, you can have more attention inside the company, and people start to trust SEO more, they pay more attention, and then you start being more successful in SEO.
Yeah, so linking business outcomes with all the technical geekery and all the decisions we've made. Now, when you mentioned, I made a new page of notes here for myself: people and process. I think the whole title is a little bit vague, and I think we need to drill into it. What does that really mean, people and process? You know, what are the subcategories of that idea? What is there to be solved? What are the pain points? So rather than going to Marcus for this, we're going to switch on to our mystery guest.
I would say the things big companies struggle with most are processes, because there's so many teams involved. Large companies have broken up for a reason into lots of different sections, departments, sub-departments, and the bigger the company gets, the bigger the division between one team and the next, and so trying to align work becomes way more complicated. The other thing is platforms. It's easy when the whole site is built in WordPress. But then you go to an enterprise site, it actually might be a collection of many different products that are bolted together to build an experience the customer sees. Different sections could be powered by different tools, and then within a section that's common, it could have dozens or hundreds of standalone applications. To the customer, it's just one big website, but internally, within the company, you could have literally dozens or hundreds of different teams building individual applications to service one particular section of that site. And so then to go on and coordinate some large initiative. To Marcus's point, it becomes quite a logistics exercise, because they've got to go and identify all the people that own the various systems and platforms. You need to go and work out what their intake process might look like, because it's often not as simple as sending someone an email. Some teams might do quarterly planning, some teams might do monthly. Some teams may have a process where you can take an ad hoc request that may be a slightly smaller nature. Then you gotta go and line up the work depending on its size and complexity and get that work onto their roadmap. It has to be prioritized. Just because it's on a backlog doesn't mean it's gonna get done. Then it needs to be prioritized, and then hopefully you want to get this thing prioritized at the same time with a comparable delivery date of the other work, depending on what the project is. Sometimes you have it delivered at different times, and that's okay. Other times they need to be delivered at a similar time to be effective. And so that becomes maybe one of the biggest challenges in large companies: coordination of resources. Large companies also use lots of different tools to coordinate their existing efforts, such as Confluence or Jira. If you were to build a completely separate product that's geared towards enterprise, you'd need to understand how that tool that you're building would best interface with that. Or is it simpler to continue using Jira?
You just touched on something really interesting, and that's something I found is that when you throw a new tool at people, you get the resistance. No, not another tool. And especially older we get, like once you go past 30, it's like learning a new tool, you're stuck in your ways. It's like, so this is a super big challenge, I think, by like overcoming the resistance to, especially if you have something, that solves a lot of complexity in itself, the tool itself needs to be super simple, which I think is a really, really difficult challenge. Now, I think we go back to Marcus to see how his idea of people and process aligns with what our guest has proposed.
Yes. I mean, all the comments and ideas were spot on, but they are very different for like all the different companies. Why? I mean, of course, most companies use Jira, especially in the development cycle. They use Confluence for documentation and that kind of stuff. I think this is really common and something you can build on. Like you're using like lots of connections within the software to kind of like push user stories to Jira and maybe sync back, etc. I think this is not the case, but I believe, especially when you talk about people and processes, you have to accept that people in different teams with different understandings and different goals, which is very, very important. They need a different story and they need also different reporting. So take product and engineering. Product and engineering are responsible for certain parts of the website. And like we have heard, sometimes you have dozens, sometimes you have hundreds of teams. And this is the case when you have that many teams that they own a specific part of the website. Maybe it's only like a certain element on a list page, right? You're on e-commerce, you have list pages and they link to product pages, but maybe you have a product team that's only responsible for a certain piece. So that means if they change something there according to their goals, maybe the goal is to increase conversion rate, to increase, I don't know, the retention, or to have the user longer on their page. So they might do something that contradicts with SEO, but still they're able to achieve their goal, because if they increase the conversion rate, in that moment, it doesn't say if they lose visibility, that's like something they shouldn't care about. And that's why what I think for people and process for large companies means you need to understand and accept that these different teams, and that's not just for product and engineering, but also for marketing and management and business development, etc. They need different reportings when it comes to SEO. It must be, it must include their objectives, right? Their OKRs. It must include how they can do a better job, because if SEOs think they can force something on others which partially contradict their goals, that just makes no sense. So you have to first dumb down the complexity of SEO for them. So you need to think about, okay, what is important for them, for example, like product teams. And then you have to change the data and the reporting and the story that it's fine for them. Like, let's take page speed as an example. So when in November 2020, Google announced hey, Core Web Vitals are going to become a major part, or not major, but become part of the algorithm. Everybody was like, page speed, everything is super important now. And page speed, we have to optimize, and we have to have a very high performance score and stuff like this. And some companies were really managed to get a good page speed because they understood how this announcement from Google could be like transferred into like user stories, how maybe top down was their like prioritization from the management, like this is what we have to do and we should not care about features, we should care about page performance, stuff like this. But at the same time, I've seen seriously many companies struggling with page speed, even knowing it's important. Why? Because the product teams, they had all different objectives, and maybe there's someone working on this category page and they include some integration and it's super heavy on JavaScript, and maybe they even include like a lot of additional bloat on the page that makes it slower, whereas other teams try to improve the performance. So that means for SEO is like, okay, how can I use the information? Page speed is important, is becoming increasingly important. What can I do? What can the process be to make sure that we have a good page speed? And it might include that the SEO is working very technical with teams on, okay, whenever there's a deployment, we make unit tests that include page speed insight data, maybe putting Lighthouse into the deployment process, or putting other tools into the deployment process, that there's a double check and validation if there's no issue on the page speed, at least it's not getting slower and maybe increasingly getting better. Or having like a weekly report for the CTO, for example, to say, hey, this is the page speed we have, like just some KPIs, and do not make it too complex. Like only have the Core Web Vitals, for example, and compare the Core Web Vitals to the broader competition, because especially the higher you go, G2 management, they often compare themselves against the competition. They like the competition, right? Like at the Olympics, you know, you want to win the gold medal, and you're not fine if you are fourth place and have no medal at all, even like with hard training, etc. So make a report for the CTO that's dumped down on, this is how we're doing on some KPIs, page speed, and this is how our competition is doing. And why this is so powerful is whenever the competition is making progress, like getting faster on LCP or getting better on CLS, whatever, and you stuck, then you even as a company, you have like kept your status quo, but when competition has gotten better, you have actually lost. And this is very powerful. That's something you can do, for example, for management. For marketing, for example, because they often own things like advisory pages, they have story pages, they often own like very large parts of the content-centric website. For them, you can make reports where it's about, hey, this is trending at the moment and we are not covering this, or this is a topic where we might add additional content or assets, could be videos, images, or whatever, like using like SERP data, for example, like, hey, Google is showing very visual results, we only have text, maybe we should change. Again, using data and not making like, hey, this is the visibility we have, take it or leave it. Make a dedicated storytelling report for all these different departments or maybe different teams, because this is what they can then utilize to improve. And I think this is the magic, because often SEOs, they believe if they put together a visibility reporting and maybe include some Google Analytics and Google Search Console data and then send out something incredibly data heavy, that's what I think SEOs often believe, more is better. In the enterprise world, less is more. Dump it down, make it attractive, have a story around it. And this is going what resonates with the people, and especially the higher you go with management, include your competition, because people, especially decision makers, they like to take on the challenge. And this is how I've seen SEO works. And if you can kind of build that kind of process, everything else will most likely follow.
100% agree. I mean, in our reports, I've always been insisting that my team doesn't just say what happened. I insist that we have a section in the executive summary form at the very beginning of the report that says, this is what we need to do. This is what this means, and this is what we need to do. And now check it out, see why we are saying what we need to do. So even if somebody up in the management is too busy to see what's going on and understand, at least they've read that first paragraph of text, knowing what happened and what needs actioning. It's kind of like the principle of inverted pyramid in journalism. You start off with saying what happened, when, how, and then you go into the details, and then towards the very bottom of the article, you leave all the non-important fluff. But one thing that I think you will be facing once your idea turns into reality is that people will crunch down what you've done into a single concept, into a single word. Just like Ahrefs is a place where you go to check links. They do a lot more than that. It's a place where you go to check links, right? You ask somebody else, what does SEMrush do? Oh, you can go and check your competitors' traffic. That's it. Of all the things that the tool suite does, they'll just say that one thing. They do the same thing with brands and companies. They ask, who are these DEJAN guys? Oh, it's the guys that do SEO experiments. That's us. So I'm going to ask you first, Marcus, what do you think they'll be distilling you as into a singular thing? Then I'm going to ask our guest what he thinks, the same thing. All right. So just in one sentence, Marcus, what do you think?
That's what I hope. Let's say this. So I hope that people will see what I'm building is as the answer machine. So I go to this place, I get answers proactively. I don't need to do lots of complex things. I get answers because this product is like pulling so many different data points, trying to build conclusions. So it's the answer machine.
So the answer machine, and I guess so far from the limited input we've had, what was your impression of what this is going to be? Like, let's be ruthless here.
I think there's a chance that you could end up with a great tool that's hard to get across the line or to have a team or a company use it. If you're not careful, for reasons that you guys can't understand right now, it may be difficult for enterprise clients to onboard to that tool. You would need to be very crisp about understanding what this product is. An answer machine that enterprises can actually use to get answers and to take action and to make the business better, as opposed to having an answer machine that they can't take action on because they can't use it. This is specific to very large commerce sites. I'm talking tens of millions or hundreds of millions of pages. Being able to build high-quality content that customers actually find value or utility in, that they can take action on. Another one is better quality impact analysis or forecasting. So hey, we've got this answer machine that comes up and says, you should take this action. And to be able to predict the impact of that change in a way so that the answer or the problem that you take to the product and technology teams you work with find that compelling. Hey, we can prioritize that piece of work because it's worth X many dollars. That feels like it's not a solved problem yet. In SEO in general, regarding your comment earlier, Dan, about having a tool that surfaces insights about a business. Just as an example, you could turn on the answer machine connected to a website onboarded or connected with Google Search Console, other third-party industry sources, like Ahrefs, Majestic, and SEMrush. All of these third-party tools plus analytics data, and you could retrospectively look at all of that data and say, hey, we can see all of these events that have taken place, and we can start to see these sorts of events. We're causal or correlated to better business performance. Hey, you ran this PR campaign and lots of links came into this page, and then subsequently this website starts to improve maybe because of that activity. Whatever the activity is, but without having to necessarily start today. You've got years of historical data for a tool to be able to look at and to be able to analyze all of the various sorts of events that might have taken place. You know, maybe a customer could input key events, and the tool could look at those and plus others that it might automatically identify. I don't think that's solved. I don't think that the internal cross-linking for large enterprise sites is solved. It's a mammoth problem. And I don't think most enterprises really appreciate the complexity of what that means. And then the way that maybe Google's systems are different today compared to where they were, say, 10 years ago, and the impact that type of stuff can have. And also, kind of connected to the internal linking is content or a page catalog, like an index of all of the pieces of content that you have. Large enterprise sites produce more and more content all the time, but they have all of these other pieces of content maybe that are published on a similar topic, and no one ever goes back and looks at all of those other pieces of content. Should they refresh them? Should they update all of the links from that article to this new article because it's more relevant? Should they redirect them and decommission those pieces and redirect those articles to the new article that they've produced? I don't think that is a common thing to consider the historical content.
You sparked up an idea, it's overlapping different metrics for the purposes of decision making. When you said you touched on automated semantic page categorization based on its topic clustering of different pages. You said you have millions of pages. Now, if we in the pile of 100 million pages of content on a website, we have a page that could be reused on the basis that it already has 32 inbound domains linking to it. Why start a brand new page for this new thing we're doing, which is semantically related? We can dust off the old one, repurpose that URL, and go. So that's one thing. But these are tiny little things. But when you have a website where you need to work at scale, this type of intelligence would be actionable. Somebody can actually do something with this. Obviously, you wouldn't do this manually. It's very difficult to do anything manually on a big enterprise website. But you gotta start somewhere, and you have to make decisions based on something. So if you had a table of all the pages that are older than 2 years of age and have more than 100 inbound links from 20 different root domains, so that's a metric. That's a custom metric that's giving you a potential insight. Now, I haven't been thinking too much about internal linking and cross-linking, and but now that I remember, I was one of the first people fiddling with Gephi. If you guys remember that tool, where you harvest all your website's URLs, you put it in. It's a desktop application. You run it on your desktop, and you crunch the page rank. You calculate the page rank manually, to understand the eigenvector centrality of the whole site, and you start to understand how the internal linking structure works in a very, very visual way. Not only does it give you a pretty graph, but also gives you a table of data that sorts all the pages in the order of its page rank. So there's all sorts of wonderful things we could do here. But I think the question is, where do we start? What's going, like, if we were to release some level of functionality prior to everything else, what would it be? What do you think, Marcus? Would you wait until you have a reasonable suite of tools, or would you kick things off with a razor sharp set of functionality?
I mean, when you want to build a code that's like usable by people and people really like it, then unfortunately you have to do a lot of things that might not look productive from the outside and might not look innovative from the outside, but you still have to do them, right? You need to build the frame, you need to build I don't know, like the gear and whatnot, stuff that's commodity that doesn't really look like important. And if you look at SEMrush now, I mean, it's a really great platform with lots of features. But what I do not is just add another feature. That's not my plan. My plan is to build something on top that looks and feels like SEMrush, but is actually really tailored towards these large companies. And that means I have to build a couple things that let's call it commodity. How you kind of set up projects, manage projects, how certain visualizations are, because I can't just go in like, hey, this is now the innovation, go in and use it, because people expect to have a couple things, especially in the enterprise world. And I do have to do these things, not all of them, that's not the point. But I have to do them. Like, I mean, like look at Tesla, right? So they have revolutionized the car industry with building electric cars that look great, that people are passionate about it. They have great marketing. They couldn't just say, hey, we are changing the world, how electricity for doing many different things, right? So that's why I need a little bit of time. Many things we have discussed are on my plan. I do have a pretty good, like, let's call it like rough roadmap, but do not expect anything in the next couple of months. That's very unlikely. And one of the biggest things, or the biggest problems for me, is that I'm definitely solving it, is prioritization. Because there's so many like things and ideas. Like if we just like elaborate further on internal links, you can build like a whole suite of like multiple tools just around internal links, because it's so incredibly powerful. But the software building is not only about internal links, and I have it only about internal links, even if the impact is so large. My idea is that large companies are struggling because of this human factor. I mean, you've mentioned like people rather create new content instead of looking if there's existing content that can be changed, or like used as a foundation to much quicker like have like good visibility and rankings on existing stuff. And why? Because people are not using this data, right? So it's much easier for like content marketing teams to create something new, because it's a known process. Okay, for new content, we are using this framework. We have ideation, and then we have, I don't know, a draft, and then there's brainstorming, and then we add, I don't know, visuals, and then we make a publish and launch campaign with email marketing, whatnot. For new content, there's a proven process. And there's no process for existing content. That's because that's not what people think about. And I'm definitely going to use lots of different custom, that's also important, really based on customer, custom data sets, to try to find lots of answers that people can really use like immediately to improve their SEO. And I can't tell you how it will look like, because I don't have like a design yet. I'm working on like basically like structure and idea at the moment. But this is really the puzzle I want to like put together, like all these different teams, and how do they work, and how do they think, and what's their process, and what do they need. And sometimes they only need little things. They do not need to look like incredibly crazy and large. Sometimes it's just little things, and they might have a big impact. But yeah, more input is to kind of like help me filter all these ideas. Again, I really believe the biggest piece is like the human factor. People are used to like do things as easy as possible with the assumed impact they believe, but often the assumed impact is not the impact that's the best for the company. That's again what I'm trying to kind of like to solve. And for some it goes faster, like, you know, working on SEO processes that is like helping SEOs to improve product and engineering processes. Could be page speed issues, could be like internal linking issues, could be many different things that are more towards like technical things. But in the long run, it's really all about these things that have a high entrance, and content is also one thing. So for example, I've worked with one company where I had a correlation of the content age, so when was the content created, and the performance. And now, like in hindsight, it sounds easy. Like, sure, I mean, older content should perform worse than newer content. Yeah, that's easy. But it's not that easy from when you're inside, right? So, and when you make this analysis and you figure out that okay, the content that was produced maybe 5 years ago doesn't perform that well that content that was produced like 3 years ago. Oh, we should update the content, but that's then the question, which content? What's the potential behind? Maybe it's content that's expired because it was something that only occurred temporarily and is not relevant anymore. So there's then the next step of the analysis. But these things I really think about and I want to solve. And I believe this is where there's no software that can really help you with these things. These customized processes really on a company basis. Lots of things that our mystery guests have said too. And I really appreciate his comments because it really, fits together in how I think.
We'll see how consistent his comments are with everyone else's though. So my plan is to take this further and broader. I will engage a broader community in SEO, especially those who work with bigger, more complex projects. And we'll try to do two things. We will try to get a quantitative study where I get simple metrics, what's missing, kind of like that question I asked, what if we could magically solve one problem for you, what would it be? What's the biggest pain point, that sort of thing. And then the next thing we're going to do is perhaps have a few episodes of people talking about the difficulties that they're finding in their process with large projects, and see how that aligns with what you'd like to solve. And at one point, I would love to have you back on air and discussing where you're up to, and hopefully getting some more feedback from you and for you. With that, we'll end our broadcast, and we'll look forward to seeing you once again.